Spider-Man 4, the film that got cancelled, and now I'm heartbroken. Not gonna lie, but every time I rewatch the Raimi films, I just crave a fourth film even more. Honestly, it would have been good to see a fourth Spider-Man film, not just because it would have given an actual ending that Sam Raimi would have been satisfied with, but because the Sam Raimi movies were the films that defined superhero movies for a very long time. Spider-Man 1, 2, and 3 all have special places in a lot of people's hearts, including myself. You don't have to like them per se, but you can't dispute that they had contribution and influence on the entire way superhero movies were looked at by the media and general audiences. Them, X-Men, and the Nolan Dark Knight trilogy showed us that superhero movies can mean something, whether it's mental struggles explored by the Sam Raimi trilogy and how being a superhero affects your mental health, whether it's the physically demanding side and the breaking point of characters within Batman and how that affects his life and the people around him, or maybe it's how being an outcast from the rest of society makes you feel through characters like Logan. But if Spider-Man 4 was released, it would have been released right into the path of superhero movies that were directly influenced by the first film back in 2002. And it probably would have been overlooked, not credited enough, and it's tough to say how it would have performed. If Spider-Man 4 was anything like the first two films, it's fair to say it wouldn't even perform very well, at least in my opinion. That wouldn't mean it would be a bad movie, it just means that it would be overlooked and discredited due to its non-formulaic structure compared to the ensemble superhero movies like we have today in the MCU, which were building to like the Avengers in the very next year. It would be dated, it would feel out of time, it would feel like a classic early 2000s superhero film released into the path of the rise of Marvel Studios. But who even cares about that? Whether this film did well or not, I'm here to bring you Spider-Man 4, LewisFilms edition. I will take ideas originally from the storyboards and stuff that Sam Raimi has said, etc. However, I will put my own spin on it and tell the story I'd partly have liked to have seen. So here it is, Spider-Man 4. The start of the movie will be an intro just like the first three movies, recapping the events of the previous three movies. We will show things like the Goblin's death, the spider bite, the train fight, MJ, Doc Ock, Black Spider-Man, Harry's death, Peter and Sandman, and so on. We will cut to a narration of Peter Parker as he introduces us to the story. Spider-Man will swing into the camera and then we'll get a montage of Spider-Man taking down criminals like bank robbers, C/D-list villains. He will first take down the Shocker and disable his blasters, then he will take down the Prowler, and finally he will go against Stiltman. Peter will get home that night absolutely exhausted and the radio will be on and Spider-Man will be getting a lot of recognition and being thanked by the city even though he is absolutely exhausted. Peter will mourn Harry's death and will go across pictures of himself, MJ and Harry all together with them in school. Peter will also read a note from Ursula, his flatmate, telling him how much she'll miss him and their chocolate cake gatherings. It is revealed that Peter is actually moving out of his apartment to move in with MJ. The next day, Peter is moving out of his apartment and we get a nice little moment with Mr. Dickovich where he jokes about wanting rent. MJ comes over to help move some stuff, but then all of a sudden Peter's radio goes off. There is a crime downtown and Spider-Man is needed. Peter leaves in a hurry and Dickovich comments on how Peter has always been so strange. Spider-Man swings into action as he encounters the Master of Illusions, Mysterio. Spider-Man has no trouble taking him down and it's revealed that Mysterio, who is played by Bruce Campbell, is the one behind all of these recent attacks and uproar in villains. It is explained, however, that there has been a rise in villains within the city unexpectedly for no reason, and no one knows why and where they came from, yet they're bigger than regular thugs, but not quite Doc Ock Green Goblin level villains. In the same scene, Captain George Stacy also explains to Spider-Man that they have concluded there must be a kingpin of some sorts behind this. Spider-Man also meets someone called Felicia at the same police station who tries to talk to Spider-Man. She acts like she is a reporter to get questions. Spider-Man answers hesitantly and awkwardly, but then swings off. The next scene, we get introduced to our main antagonist of the film, which is Adrian Toombs. It is explained that he is working on new tech for the military, and he has big investors. It is revealed that his big investor goes by the name of none other than Wilson Fisk, and he is the one funding all of his projects. There is a New York Science Expo and contest, and Adrian Toombs is going to be the one of the big scientists a part of it. He is confident that he'll win. Wilson Fisk demands that he wins, or else his money will be wasted. The next scene is that it revealed that Toombs has a dying wife and wants to save her. He believes that his tech, and if he works hard enough along with the investors, he can become a worldwide phenomenon and save her. The night of the expo, Peter meets up with MJ for a date where they would go to the expo and then have dinner afterwards. Peter tells MJ that Jameson wants pictures, so he'll go and grab some while he's there. Peter also reveals he's finally ready to propose as he shows a ring to the camera, obviously not to MJ. Felicia, the same girl at the police station, is also at the expo, and Peter recognizes this, and it's the same girl. Toombs presents his tech, and it's a wing gliding tech. He presents his ideas and innovations confidently, even showing off a prototype tech off in a glass container and his progress. Toombs steps down and the next person comes up, but someone in a cat costume ruins the show and tears it down. She calls herself the Black Cat. Before Peter could do anything, he gets MJ out of there safely and Spider-Man swings into the scene. Spider-Man also saves Toombs and gets him to safety. Spider-Man has a tussle with the Black Cat, and Cat gives off her flirtatious personality throughout the fight, showing what kind of person she is, personified through her fighting style and ability. She escapes successfully, however, with Spider-Man having no knowledge on why she attacked and what her motive was behind it. We then cut to a scene with J. Jonah Jameson where he ridicules Peter for not having enough pictures of the fight between the Black Cat. He has pictures of the expo, but not the fight with Spider-Man and Cat. Jameson ridicules Peter for this in one of these classic funny scenes. Peter tries to figure out who this Black Cat person is. He plays it off as another Mysterio-type villain. Black Cat robs banks and stores on the low-key. The city comes crumbling underneath the weight of crimes being committed, and Spider-Man can't even keep up with them. Black Cat is causing havoc, and it allows other thieves to slip under the police's and Spider-Man nose. Spider-Man's reputation starts to become affected as Peter starts to obsess with catching Black Cat and puts a rift between himself and MJ, causing them two to have arguments. Peter tries to make it up to MJ by taking her out on a date, but they end up fighting in the middle of a restaurant. Felicia, who has been stalking Peter Parker, very weirdly sees this and approaches Peter at the restaurant, and they start to have a conversation, and it's revealed that obviously Felicia has seen him around, and Peter has as well, vice versa. The next scene, we get a downtime scene with Aunt May bringing Peter back to Earth. Spider-Man will finally chase down the Black Cat, but it leads him straight to Fisk Industries, who was the investor that Adrian Toombs mentioned at the expo. Spider-Man fights Black Cat, but Cat reveals that she knows he is Peter Parker. This is because Felicia had become a detective from a young age, thus fleshing out her character a little bit more. And obviously she had been stalking Peter and then had found a connection between himself and the way that Peter takes photos of Spider-Man and put the pieces together. This is actually one of the first people in the Raimi trilogy to ever do this. Peter guesses that she is Felicia, the person that she met at the police station and at the restaurant and at the expo, and Felicia doesn't hesitate in congratulating him on figuring it out. Spider-Man finds out that Fisk is the kingpin behind all of the crime, and Black Cat was also working for him. Spider-Man takes down Fisk, and the investment for Adrian's project is absolutely gone. Fisk is sent to prison, but Adrian is furious. However, Black Cat escapes Spider-Man again, to Peter's frustration. Adrian is absolutely furious with Spider-Man. Adrian thought Spider-Man was a good person as he saved him earlier, but he was wrong. Spider-Man betrayed him. He uses his prototype vulture wings to rob banks to finish his project as he becomes more desperate. Spider-Man intervenes the vulture at the bank. Adrian is becoming even more pissed at Spider-Man. The vulture, however, to Peter's surprise, stands Spider-Man up and proves he is one of the fiercest opponents Spider-Man has ever faced, and gets away. Peter confronts Felicia about it, and she is pissed at Peter. She reveals that Adrian Toombs is her father and that he was the man who attacked the bank. Felicia helped Fisk commit the crimes for his empire, so her father's investment didn't crumble, meaning that Adrian could make the money necessary. But she did it in secret as she didn't want her father to know that she was a criminal. She feels ashamed of herself, but she had to. Peter asks why, and it was because Adrian used the money he earned to pay for Felicia's mother's care. Peter is put between a rock and a hard place. He says he will help Felicia turn her life around so she can help her mother, but he won't let it be done illegally. Felicia is still pissed off, but Peter has a point. Felicia tells Adrian she knows who Spider-Man is and that it's Peter Parker out of her anger and feel of betrayal of Spider-Man. She feels like Spider-Man was meant to help people but feels betrayed, as Toombs does. Adrian isn't a bad man though. He swears he will hurt everyone Peter has ever loved if he is to intervene again, but he won't just yet. Adrian tries to rob a different sum of money from some trucks, but once again is stopped by Spider-Man. Adrian, with his motive of finishing his work and needing the money necessary for his wife and Felicia's mother, he puts up a fight, a fearsome one. He once again escapes to Peter's longing frustration. The pacing slows down for a bit as we get a scene with Peter trying to reconnect with Mary Jane. MJ ignores him. Peter tells her that he was going to marry her and she cries on the other end of the phone. Peter really misses her. It is also revealed that the city is slowly turning their back on Spider-Man, since Spider-Man hasn't been able to keep on top of the crimes since the recent rise of the Vulture and the Black Cat. The city are questioning if Spider-Man is the right man for the job anymore. The city are slowly betraying Peter, pushing Peter to be a better person and be on his A-game at all times. This slowly does get to Peter, however, though, as he starts to struggle mentally with MJ on his mind all the time, the city slowly turning against Spider-Man, and two villains that won't back down who have a morally acceptable reason for doing what they're doing, which also does put Peter between a rock and a hard place. This really is playing on Peter's emotions. We have another scene with Aunt May also bringing Peter back to Earth again. Aunt May reveals to Peter that she knows he is Spider-Man and that she has known since the events of Spider-Man 2. That is why in this scene in Spider-Man 3 she has the reaction she does when Peter tells her that the person who killed Uncle Ben had been killed by Spider-Man. She believes that Peter wouldn't even be capable of killing someone and reminds him of what a good person he is. Adrian's wife / Felicia's mother dies tragically due to her not having the right medical treatment to keep her alive. This pushes Adrian over the edge, and it's all Spider-Man's fault. We have a scene with Felicia reacting to this event, and she slowly comes to terms with it. Adrian suits up as the Vulture, completely insane, and takes Mary Jane and longs for Spider-Man to fight him and swears to kill everyone he has ever loved. Spider-Man is quick on the scene after the powerful message by Aunt May and realizes no matter how much people in your life betray you, you can never give up on hope. This is the difference between Adrian and Peter in this movie. Peter is the representation of someone who didn't give up on hope when he really could have, when the city was against him, when MJ was against him, when Felicia was the Black Cat, and Adrian is the personified opposite to Peter, a man who crumbled under pressure, who was driven insane by the betrayal of those he thought were good. This is a yin and yang, this is a good versus evil, this is a Jekyll versus Hyde. Felicia is also on the scene, but not as the cat, but watching. Spider-Man tries to break through to Adrian that this is not the way. The Vulture beats the living crap out of Spider-Man. Vulture was about to kill MJ in front of Peter's eyes when Black Cat steps in. Black Cat has now betrayed her father, following the theme of the movie and watching it come full circle. Felicia realized that killing MJ won't bring her mother back, and it would do more harm than good. The death of Adrian's wife / Felicia's mother was the turning point for both of these characters. For Adrian, it was the snapping point where he just went completely off the rails. From Felicia's perspective, it was the realization and understanding that because of her actions and ignorance, she could have saved her mother if she had just took Peter's advice. At the start of the movie, Adrian started off as an admirable man, and Felicia started off as a criminal, working for Wilson Fisk. Now Adrian has fallen, and Felicia has risen. Their arcs completely parallel one another. Black Cat helps Spider-Man take down the Vulture, but it's not over yet. The Vulture is furious that even his own flesh and blood would betray him. Rage gets the better of the Vulture, and he kills Mary Jane in front of Peter's eyes. Peter is engulfed with anger. He stops the Vulture, but doesn't kill him, as that's not what Uncle Ben would have wanted. Peter and Felicia share a moment at the end of the movie like MJ and Peter did after Harry died. Peter and Felicia have that relatability of losing someone they loved, and use that to bond with each other and become friends. There is no final swing to this movie, as this movie doesn't end on a high note like Spider-Man 1 or 2, but the lowest of low Peter Parker will ever feel. We start our story with Peter at his lowest he has ever been in the entire series. MJ just died in the last one, and Peter is depressed. He doesn't know what to do with his life. In the last movie, he was too focused on being Spider-Man to try and prove himself, but in this movie, he isn't focused on being Spider-Man at all. It's a complete polar opposite. This movie changes perspective, really reflects the tonality of this movie right from the get-go. It is going to be a slow, dark, and depressing story, but at the same time, Peter's arc is set here. The only way for Peter to go is up in this movie. This is a redemption story. The symbolism and metaphors in the first couple of scenes will be filled to the brim with dark color gradients, like a dark blue to represent Peter's grieving, rain, dimming lights, and no dialogue whatsoever. The only ambient sound in these scenes will be the soothing, heart-wrenching musical score by Christopher Young.
The sounds from the outside will be dimmed out and will sound like they're being ignored by Peter, as this movie is from his perspective, which could represent the concentration he has dwelling on his own thoughts. His own thoughts are the only thing he can concentrate on, and in those thoughts would be one person, MJ. A couple of scenes later, and we will have a scene at MJ's funeral. Peter is there with May and a couple of Peter's school friends. Flash shows up too. The previous Spider-Man movies have ended on funerals, and one has never opened on one before. However, I'm going to flip the tradition on its head. Instead of including this scene at the end of the last movie, I'm going to put it here. The reason for this is because whenever a Spider-Man movie has ended with a funeral, it's allowed the next movie to start a new leaf and a fresh page for a Spider-Man story. Yes, events from the previous movie have carried over to affect the next, but my version is going to be a more extreme variation of this. I'm starting the movie with a funeral, so there is nowhere for me to hide. I can't just turn a new leaf and tell another Spider-Man story. No, this will be a redemption story. We know these characters really well, and it's time to show a deeper understanding of them. We will be reintroduced to our now lead female, Felicia Hardy, at the funeral scene, and she will also be there to comfort Peter straight after. It's revealed that in between the two films, these two characters have become really good friends now, and their relatability of being superheroes have really given them a connection. However, they have become more personal friends with each other at this point as well. The problems are really exaggerated when Peter doesn't even have enough money to pay for her funeral costs. The costs are put on Peter as MJ has no one else in her life to support her. Her father left her in the first movie, and he didn't even show up to the funeral. So once again, a problem is put on Peter Parker to handle. Peter is trying to grind out pictures at the Daily Bugle to pay for the costs, but it isn't cutting it. This also cuts into his work as Spider-Man at this point as well. He is being Spider-Man for the money at the Bugle rather than being Spider-Man because it's a responsibility he carries. At this point, the city starts to put more faith in Black Cat to do the hero work. Peter is already on edge with being behind on money for MJ's funeral and trying to be Spider-Man, all while trying to grieve at the same time. The city starts to trust the cat more than Spider-Man. And it's set here that trust is the main theme for this film. Felicia tells Peter to take a step back and let the Black Cat handle the city for a while. However, Peter is having none of it. Although he's slacking, Peter still understands his morality. He says to Felicia that his responsibility is to protect the city because of what Uncle Ben told him, and not just for the city, but for MJ. Felicia understands Peter, but points out to him that he might be saying this, but this isn't what his actions are reflecting. This puts them into a big fight as Peter snaps at her. Peter is in a really bad place, and his mental game isn't so strong right now. This then puts a rift between the two characters, once again highlighting that trust may be the theme going forward in this movie. Peter needs money, and the Bugle isn't paying enough, so Peter goes looking for a job that would potentially pay more than Jameson. And obviously we know that Peter and MJ moved into the same house in the last movie. In this movie, Peter's going to sell that house and then move back in with Mr. Dickovich, good old Mr. Dickovich, so he can just pay minimum rent and not have to pay for the house as well, so he gets more money to pay off the debt he owes. Dr. Connors offers Peter a job to come and work at the lab where he used to go to school in at Spider-Man 3. Peter accepts. On his first day, Connors reveals to Peter the backstory to how he lost his arm. This scene fleshing out Dr. Connors' character, giving him a backstory, and now his motivation is clear for this film. All he wants to do is grow his arm back so he can raise his son. In one of the flashbacks in Dr. Connors' backstory, there is going to be a scene where Kurt's wife picks up his son with both arms. When his son comes over to Kurt, he can't pick him up due to him not having both arms. It's the simplest of things, but delivered in the saddest way. We as an audience feel for Kurt because he can't raise his son properly like a normal father. He can't play some sports with him, etc., do fatherly activities. This also fleshes out Peter's and Kurt's relationship, as we already knew they knew each other in the previous movies, but this just homes in on what kind of relationship they have and where it is developing. It's developing more from a student-teacher kind of relationship to a more friendly and personal connection between the two characters. So Connors reveals to Peter that he has found a way to regrow his arm back. He just doesn't know how to finish it yet. A few more scenes go by and we have a scene where Peter and Felicia are trying to reconnect with each other and apologize. However, it doesn't go as planned. Peter tells Felicia about his new job with Dr. Connors, and Felicia tells Peter that her father, Adrian Toombs, used to work with Dr. Connors and didn't trust him, and said that he was insane. He looked normal from the outside, but Connors has a burning passion from inside to push everyone else aside just so he could regrow his arm, and that's how Adrian and Connors stopped working together, and thus why Adrian went solo and the Vulture was born. Felicia tells Peter to stop working for him. However, the distrust they already have slightly for each other affects this interaction, as Peter claims he needs a way to pay for MJ's funeral, all the while Felicia is just trying to protect Peter as a friend. This furthers the rift between these two characters. Felicia is really hellbent on trying to get Peter to understand here, but he's having none of it. At this point we get a bit of characterization for Felicia. As we know from the last movie, she didn't have any friends. The only person she had was her father, while now all she has is Peter. But she is slowly losing him to Peter's own downfall. All she's trying to do is help and do good, which she learned and was taught by Peter in the last film, so it's almost ironic. But she's also angry. She's angry that Peter won't let her help him. The only person Peter can really trust now apart from Aunt May is Dr. Connors. From Peter's perspective, everyone in this movie has tried to tell him no or tried to drag him down in some way so far. Now I'm going to take a page from the Amazing Spider-Man movie here. Peter will help Dr. Connors figure out the formula he needs to regrow his arm. They use lizard DNA, as a lizard has the ability to grow new limbs, and they think that if they combine it with the human DNA, they can recover Connors' arm. Dr. Connors uses the formula that Peter helps him with, and it works. Peter is happy for once. However, a couple of hours later and Dr. Connors starts to transform, and out of nowhere Dr. Connors has become a giant raging lizard. Peter sees this and as Spider-Man swings into action. Him and the lizard have a fight and the lizard comes out on top and escapes Spider-Man's grasp. Peter goes back to the labs to go and visit Dr. Connors to see the labs is in tatters. He checks the security footage and sees that Dr. Connors is the lizard. Peter, because of this, hits another low in this movie. He doesn't trust Felicia because of the disagreements. He doesn't trust the city because the city don't trust him. He doesn't trust Connors, but most importantly because of this, Peter has lost all trust in himself. The only person who knew that great power comes great responsibility now has no trust in himself. Because he made Connors the lizard, he helped make the formula for Connors, and now it's all his fault. Peter needs guidance, so goes to Aunt May. We have a scene where these two are talking and it's an emotional scene. Aunt May tells Peter the error of his ways and that dwelling on MJ's death is fueling the anger and distrust that he has on others around him. He also then realizes in the moment that Felicia was right about the way he had been going about being Spider-Man. It wasn't because of selflessness, it was because of selfishness. Peter exclaims his problems surrounding Connors and the lizard. May tells him that he still needs to save his friend. No matter how much he obsesses over the lizard business, he needs to help him and not hurt him. Peter does agree. May also tells Peter to apologize to Felicia and tells him that he is a good person. He was just blinded by his love for MJ. His grieving won't stop at all, but Peter has a perspective on the way to approach his situation now. The redemption of Peter Parker starts here. Peter goes and apologizes to Felicia through the phone, and Felicia says that she's out and she's with other friends, which is weird because Felicia never had any other friends. Felicia, after her falling out with Peter, decided to go out in the world and make friends, explore a little. After all, Peter was a toxic part of her life. She still loves Peter, but she just needs a break from him. Peter understands and has learned from their previous interactions and doesn't cause a fight this time. However, it's not all over yet. Peter still has to find the lizard. The lizard has been spotted in an area of New York City, and there is an epic scene where Spider-Man swings through the city to go and finally end all of this. It's just him, as it was from day one. Spider-Man, the real Spider-Man, is back. And the original theme by Danny Elfman, the epic score, kicks in. Spider-Man finds the lizard and tries to get through to him. They fight one another, punch, kick, punch, kick. The lizard has him pinned down though. He's beating Spider-Man, almost like he'd become stronger since their last encounter. A crowd of people start to surround the fight, and before the lizard could completely take Spider-Man's head off, the Black Cat arrives to help Spider-Man. The lizard escapes again, however, but Peter and Felicia have a heart-to-heart. Peter apologizes properly, and Felicia tells him that if she just ditched him for other people and started ignoring him, she wouldn't become any better than Peter herself. Thus, both characters have learned something up to this point in the movie, and it's time to get going. It's time to finally end all of this. With Felicia's detective skills, from which we learned in the last movie, in Spider-Man 4, she helps Peter track down where the lizard went to. Peter tells Felicia that the lizard seemed like he had grew stronger than before. The track sent him to a secret underground sewer where Dr. Connors had been conducting all of his experiments. It's revealed in a scene with Connors that he didn't want Peter, his son, or his family to find out about what he'd become because he was ashamed. But he was still determined to perfect the serum, so kept adding to it. However, every time he became the lizard, he would become stronger, faster, and would mutate for longer, almost like his body was getting used to the lizard DNA being in his system and evolving him. If he took it enough, he could become the lizard forever. They track him down and try to stop him, but Connors injects himself again and says he will not have his only chance of raising his son properly taken away from him. He transforms and fights Cat and Spider-Man. Black Cat is severely injured in the fight, leaving just Spider-Man versus the lizard. This is the final showdown. The lizard tears up Spider-Man's costume to the point where his mask comes off. Peter finds a way to beat up the lizard, however, by using chemicals in Connor's lab to cause a combustion reaction, putting it all up in flames. In the heat of it, the lizard transforms back to Connors, and Peter gets him and Felicia out of there before they all burn alive. Connors sees Peter's face, and them two, student to teacher, friend to friend at this point, have a moment. Peter makes Connors see the error of his ways, just as Aunt May did to Peter earlier in the movie. This is similar to what happened in Spider-Man 2, where Aunt May had a talk with Peter and passed the wisdom on to Doc Ock in the final. Connors doesn't go to prison, however, he goes to a mental institution to get help. Felicia and Peter share a moment at the end of the movie where they tell each other that they trust each other and that they're both sorry for what happened. The city now trusts Spider-Man again, as he and Black Cat save the city from the lizard. For the last two movies, Spider-Man 3 and 4, there wasn't a final swing sequence because their movies didn't really end off on a high note. However, in this movie, Felicia and Peter will be having a scene where they're just talking, some police sirens can be heard in the background, and Felicia will jokingly say something along the lines of, "You can have this one." Peter will throw on the Spider-Man costume and have a final swing representing the arc. The swing will be thrilled by an epic score in the background. The color gradient will be light and bright, the camera movements will be quick and agile, and it will be daytime in the glazing summer afternoon of New York City. The complete polar opposite to the start of the movie, to represent Peter Parker's journey and redemption.
Before we get into this film, we have to retcon some stuff from Spider-Man 3. I know I said no matter how much you guys said I should rewrite Spider-Man 3, that is good enough. I'm gonna actually have to retcon one for this film, for it to work and the story I want to tell to work. And this is Eddie Brock won't be dead. Peter will still throw the bomb at the symbiote, however the symbiote will protect Eddie. Eddie won't die but will be severely injured and also will be sent to rehab, to the same mental institution that Dr. Connors was sent to in the last film. We could call it Ravencroft, for example. The symbiote will also be weak, but over time of Spider-Man 4 and 5 will have been healing itself, ready for it to bounce back. Anyway, with that being said, let's get into Spider-Man 6. In the last film, Peter ended on a high. He fulfilled the trust back within himself and everyone else, and now he has faith in himself. He had a reputation arc from MJ's death in Spider-Man 4, and now he's back. However, this sets up his arc perfectly for this film, which will be his conclusion. Everything that Peter set out to be, can he prove himself? His arc in this film will be about proving who he is as a person, and even though he can bounce back from depressing times, can he consistently stay at the top of his game? Not just as Spider-Man, but as Peter Parker. Everything that he has learned, will it pay off? Peter and Felicia develop their relationship and have grown closer in this film. The start of the film will be an action set piece where Spider-Man and Black Cat take down some low-level villains like Arcs or Ricochet. This scene will show them fighting in harmony, which would further forward the message of trust from the last film, which gets carried over into this film to be proven by. We then get a scene with Cletus Cassidy from the post-credits scene of Spider-Man 5 in the mental asylum, and he is watching the news. The news reporter says how Spider-Man is at the top of his game and that everything is going well for him. This will throw emphasis on the redemption arc and show how far Peter has come through the 5 films. This will also show how well he has furthered his relationship with the city, Felicia, Aunt May, JJ, and everyone else in his
life. The difference between this film and Spider-Man 3, where the same sort of thing happened at the end of Spider-Man 2, is that Peter has learned not to let his ego get in the way. At the end of Spider-Man 2, everything was great for Peter in his life. He got the girl, the city loved him, and everything was going good for once, but then he let his ego get in the way, and the symbiote enhanced this and consumed him. However, this was due to his arrogance. In this film, Peter has learned from this, further forwarding his character and showing how far he has come, showing that he doesn't let his ego get in the way anymore. Cletus sits there and he thinks to himself. Cletus sees Spider-Man as a challenge. He's a psychopath and he wants in on killing Spider-Man. This right here sets up one of the two main villains for this film, which is Cletus Aka Carnage. Now, the Carnage symbiote is more powerful than the Venom symbiote, and the Venom symbiote fed off Peter's ego in the third film. However, due to Peter having learned his lesson, the Carnage symbiote will not bind with him on this occasion, paralleling Spider-Man 3 as a conclusion film. However, this time showing that Peter has learned his lesson. Also, Carnage, being an absolute psychopath, is the type of villain to push someone to their absolute limits, meaning that now that Peter is at the top of his game and it looks like nothing can bring him down, Carnage is the hardest thing that can be thrown at him. Carnage is almost an exact parallel of Peter Parker. Carnage is everything that Peter Parker doesn't want to become and everything that Peter Parker hates. They are almost the exact opposite of each other when it comes to the arcs leading up to this film, which makes him the perfect antagonist. An absolutely enraged, psycho-killing Carnage killer. We then get a scene with Peter where he attends J. Jonah Jameson's birthday party with Robbie and Betty, etc., and they all celebrate. This will be a nice little scene to celebrate the last 5 films and up to this point. We will get a payoff where we really get to slow down in this franchise and look at how much our characters have grown. We get to look at Betty and Jonah again, we get to look at Robbie, and we get to look at a few other characters that we may haven't seen as much in a while. We then get a scene with the symbiote as we see into its brain. The symbiote is personified here. It's almost making it a separate character where it can think and move on its own rather than being a representation for Peter's character, which is perfect because in Spider-Man 3 it was treated like an object, something to be used to represent something else. In this film it has thoughts, feelings. This scene will be a dark, twisted scene and a well-directed horror scene from Sam Raimi showcasing his talents. It will show how the symbiote is feeling through visual imagery because the symbiote can't talk. It will show, not tell. The symbiote will reflect its hate, however, will show its one and only love, Eddie Brock. This is because Eddie was the only one who reflected the right amount of anger to bond with the symbiote on a deeper level than anyone else. Eddie also loved the symbiote, Peter did not. The symbiote had embodied this pent-up anger and releases it, but releases it as another spawn. A red symbiote is born, and the Carnage symbiote is born. And it's this pent-up anger, this enraged, that colours it blood red. We then cut to Eddie in the same mental institution where he meets Cletus Aka. Now these two won't hit it off at first, they will argue. Cletus will know about Eddie and will try to get to know him, but Eddie won't have any of it. It has been revealed that Eddie is recovering from being obsessed with power in the symbiote. It turns out he was heartbroken, and in a scene with Eddie and his therapist, he has actually recovered really well. Eddie has also been working out in the prison gyms as well to get into shape, and becomes really buff just like the real Eddie Brock from the comics. Cletus sees this as a distraction from getting what he wants. He knows that Eddie is the key to getting to Spider-Man, as he knows he was the one last with the symbiote. So to prove to Eddie who is boss, he does the most psychotic thing anyone could do, and he kills someone. He kills Eddie's therapist, who Eddie has actually become really close to. The therapist is revealed to be called Dr. Kafka. And he didn't just do that, he wrote the initials CK on the wall in Dr. Kafka's blood. Turns out CK was the name of Cletus' alias when he went around killing people and was called the Carnage Killer, which also actually ironically stands for Cletus Cassidy. This angers Eddie a lot and a fight breaks out between Eddie and Cletus. Eddie manages to get the better of Cletus and they're both dragged apart. Then out of nowhere the symbiote tracks Eddie down and bonds with him. The symbiote sensed the anger. Eddie didn't want to bond back with it though. He tries to refuse it at first, but then it feeds off Eddie's hate for Cletus. Venom is back, but this time stronger than ever. Kidnaps Cletus and takes him away. Venom says that he will kill him for ruining his recovery. And here is the motivation for Eddie to bond back with the symbiote set up. The symbiote is finally recovered and is angry, And Venom is back. The symbiote misses Eddie. Eddie doesn't necessarily miss a symbiote, but his anger for Cletus now being set up here, symbiote, now feeds off that. We then cut to a scene where Peter is chilling with Felicia. The chemistry is really being built up here, as you can tell these two really care for each other after the last film. And then there is news Venom is back in town. Peter and Felicia go to check it out, and Venom is back. Spider-Man and Black Cat work together to fight Venom, and Venom says he doesn't want to fight Spider-Man, and he is over their petty feud they had a while ago. This unwillingness to fight Spider-Man and Cat allows them to have the advantage. Eddie tries to explain the feud with him and Cletus, but Venom still broke out the institution, and the Venom symbiote embodied the rage of Eddie towards Cletus and tried to kill him. Venom is mad and gets the upper hand and defeats them. Meanwhile, the red goo approaches Cletus and starts to crawl onto him. Cletus starts to have flashes of rage from the pent-up aggression of the symbiote offspring. Cletus doesn't look scared, but excited. It crawls onto him and he runs off into the night. Venom escapes Spider-Man and Black Cat. Jameson is back, saying that Spider-Man couldn't stop Venom this time round. Has he fallen off his game? Peter, now on edge, needs to prove himself that he can live up to the name and reputation that he has created with his greatest battle yet. Peter is unsure with himself and will share a scene with Felicia in the park at night. This scene will also further forward the chemistry that these two characters have been going over for the past 3 films. As Felicia comforts Peter, they grow closer. Peter and Felicia end up kissing each other in the park as they dwell. We cut to Carnage as Venom has tracked him down. Carnage has a witty interaction with Venom, stating that it was his destiny that a person like Cletus Cassidy winds up with the Carnage symbiote. With this amount of power, Cletus could cause massive amounts of destruction and kill so many people and push Spider-Man to the absolute limit. The insanity of Cletus Cassidy is honestly thriving off the Carnage symbiote. It's also revealed in the scene the reason Cletus is so insane is because he was raised up by an abusive father, and eventually in his twisted mind killed his entire family. If the city can put Spider-Man up on a pedestal, Carnage will bring him down. Carnage doesn't like anyone that thinks they can be above him, just like his father. Venom and Carnage now share a bond. Carnage, with all the pent-up aggression forwarded by the Carnage symbiote, tries to tell Eddie of the time that he hated Spider-Man and the time that Spider-Man almost killed him and the symbiote. Venom argues back, saying that we don't want that anymore, we want you gone out of our life. Venom tries to fight Carnage, but Carnage comes out on top. Carnage escapes into the night once again. The next day, Carnage is out in force and he's killing people left, right and center. Spider-Man goes out to fight him. Carnage wipes the floor with Spider-Man. Spider-Man stops him momentarily, however Carnage is way too powerful. The Cat comes in to help, however she has never seen Peter this injured in a fight before. Carnage was about to kill Peter until Venom comes in and stops him. Venom and Spider-Man, Peter and Eddie Brock have a moment where they help each other and look at each other. Eddie mentions that even though he doesn't really like Peter, he's still over their feud a while ago. He has grown since then. His character has developed. They agree to team up and take down Carnage. However, Carnage escapes once again. Carnage needs to take them out one by one. He wants to break Spider-Man. There is a scene with Peter and Felicia where Felicia tells Peter that they can't go out fighting him again, especially Peter. Carnage revealed that he wanted to kill Peter and wanted him dead, and Felicia knows that Carnage will break him. In this moment of desperation, Felicia reveals her true feelings for Peter and that she's interested in him, which was also expressed earlier in the film through the kiss. Felicia tries to kiss Peter again, but Peter rejects her. Felicia becomes upset, but Peter explains to her that he can't just run into another relationship just in case anything happens to him. He knows what it's like to lose a loved one, and he can't let Felicia be put through that as well. Felicia understands but cries as Peter leaves. He has to end this. He also tells Felicia that if he doesn't, then more people will eventually die to Carnage. We then have a scene where Carnage breaks into the Daily Bugle and asks over the news for Spider-Man to meet him in Times Square, one of the most public places in New York City. Spider-Man meets him and Carnage kills someone right in front of him, an innocent civilian. Peter screams for him to stop and Peter asks Carnage if he will stop if he turns himself in. If he kills him, he won't kill anyone else. Peter, being at the top of his game and his character being complete, is now learning that he has already proven himself and that he has nothing else to prove. He will finally turn himself in. He says he has the great power to do so. He says he has the great power to save everyone else. He can save the city. If he chooses between him and the city, it's going to be him. And it's his responsibility, ever since the first movie, to save other people over himself. However, Felicia won't let this happen. She sees this on the news and they all report this as this will be the death of Spider-Man, just similar to Spider-Man 3, really paralleling this film. We understand that this film is not just a sequel to Spider-Man 5, but this is a sequel to all the films in the series now, building up to this one powerful moment of Peter Parker. Felicia goes and finds Eddie, and we get a scene with Felicia and Eddie, and Felicia asks Eddie to help him. Eddie says no, because no one can beat Carnage, no one can save Peter, he's too powerful. Felicia says they at least have to try, she can't lose Peter like she lost her mother back in Spider-Man 4. Just as Carnage was about to land a final shot to Peter, Felicia and Venom show up to the scene and start to fight Carnage. Peter gets up and fights them with them. Even though his character is seemingly complete, there was one more lesson that Peter needed to learn here. And even though he was willing to make the selflessness act of sacrifice play in the place of everyone else, Felicia teaches him that you can't ever give up and always must fight till the end. Felicia, Venom and Spider-Man all fight Carnage and finally find a way to beat him. They will find a way to beat him similar to how they beat Venom in Spider-Man 3, with noises, maybe some fire, and it breaks out in a huge battle, and finally they win. Venom, Eddie Brock having the Venom symbiote finds a way to remove the symbiote from Cletus, but before Cletus can be taken away back to the same asylum, he tells Spider-Man that he beat him this time, but Peter can't handle that kind of pressure again, and that eventually he will break. Someday, he will die. Peter and Eddie have a talk. Eddie says that he isn't the same person as he was before. He said that he will take the symbiote and travel to San Francisco to start a new life. There's nothing for him here, and he promises to use the symbiote for good purposes and won't kill anyone else. Peter is fulfilled. His relationship with Brock is repaired, Carnage is gone, and that is it. Felicia and Peter hold the final scene where they talk about the events that have transpired. Felicia and Peter say they love each other and they kiss as one final swing happens for our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, the world's greatest superhero.